Alright, welcome back to the JFK Assassination Audit number 27. It's 19 December, almost Christmas, less than a week now. Hopefully you've been good, and Santa will give you lots of gifts. I'm sure I'm awaiting my big block of coal from Santa here. But anyway, so we're going to get back into this, and so I'm getting back into the timeline. And I'm talking about the rifle again, because that's what we've been focusing on. Seymour Weitzman was the man who found the rifle in the 6th floor. And we're going to go over him and his statements and things like that. We're probably going to go over him later also, after we get to the timeline part where they find the rifle. But I just want to go over this part here, and we're going to go over all the policemen that found the rifle and the evidence and stuff. So it says Seymour Weitzman was born in Dallas, Texas during the Second World War. He served in the United States Air Force, but he was shot down and became a prisoner of war in Japan. Weitzman graduated from Indiana Engineering School in 1945. He returned to Dallas and was a district supervisor and manager for Holly dress shops for 15 years. I was just thinking of something really interesting, that there's a large number of Dallas policemen that served in the war on both fronts, in Europe, and Germany, and Japan. But it seems like half of the ones that have served were all captured. Like Weitzman was captured, this other guy earlier, I think Day was captured, but in Germany he was shot down. So that's interesting little tidbit there. It says Weitzman graduated from the Indiana Engineering School in 1945. He returned to Dallas and was a district supervisor and manager for Holly's dress shop for 15 years? In 1960, Weitzman began work for the Dallas Police Department. On 22 November 1963, Weitzman and Roger Craig discovered the rifle on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. He initially described it as a 7.65 Mauser. Later he changed his mind and said it was a Mannlicher Carcano. Weitzman later gave evidence to the Warren Commission and the CBS Warren Report. So it's interesting that, I mean, again, like I was saying, you got a lot of guys who served in the war, and they're going to identify with a German Mauser because that was one of the premier weapons out there. I even understand that the Germans shipped thousands of 7.65 Mausers to the Japanese. The Germans also were arming the Chinese back in the 30s. Okay, so a lot of the Chinese army have these 7.65 Mausers, and then a lot of those are captured by the Japanese and thus used in their army as the Japanese were rolling through Japan. So it makes sense, you know, the Mannlicher Carcano, like I said, was just a copy of the Mauser. As a matter of fact, I believe it was even first manufactured in Austria, and then, you know, it was set up and manufactured in Italy. But that's interesting. So we're going to go over this real quick. Actually, no, I think I'll read what we have here. And there's a picture of Seymour Weitzman. He found the weapon. Nothing nefarious I was able to find about him. I have disturbed, though, that someone, a senior police officer, didn't go to police academy and only had 3 years of police experience before this whole thing went down. Anyway, this is the testimony of Seymour Weitzman. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like this is before the Warren Commission. And let me see. I'm just going to go through, and if I find anything interesting, I'll bring it up. Hold on a second. Now, this is interesting. I don't know if he's lying, but quite interesting. It says, were you educated in the state, partially here and in Indiana? How far did you go through school? I went through college, graduated in engineering, 1945. Now, if you're shot down in Japan, okay, and we didn't start bombing Japan until 1943 or so, because we had to build bases to get closer to Japan. That was the whole point of island hopping. So how would he have graduated with an engineering degree in 1945? That doesn't make any sense, because he would have just gotten out of Japan as a prisoner of war. Anyway, I don't know about that. I don't know what. And then again, you don't really see too many engineers becoming police officers and forensic experts. Anyway, we'll go back to this. I'll go back to reading some more, see if I find anything else interesting. Again, that's just very strange that you got a guy who was in the military, went to school for engineering, and then he comes back to Dallas and sets up a business for dresses, garments, and lady garments. By the way, also, Mr. Zapruder also had a business doing that too. But then ends up, does that for 15 years, and then ends up working for the police. Isn't that kind of strange? I don't know. Anyway, we'll keep going. All right, here we go. So it says, on November 22nd, 1963, around noon, where were you? I was standing on the corner of Main and Houston. Were you alone? No, sir. I was with another deputy, Bill Hutton. A deputy constable? Yes, sir. He and I were standing there. Did you see the president's car pass? Yes, sir, we did. We watched the president pass, and we turned and started back to the courthouse when we heard the shots. You say you turned and were starting back to the courthouse? What courthouse, and where is this location of the courthouse? Sitting on Main in Houston, Record, and so forth. We were at the back side, and we turned around and were going into the main entrance. We made 3, 4 steps when we heard what we thought at the time was either a rifle shot or a firecracker. I mean, at that second. How many shots did you hear? 3 distinct shots. How were they paced? First one, then the second 2 seemed to be simultaneously. That's another one. We got about 10, 15 people saying they were right on top of each other. You mean the first, and then there was a pause? There was a little period in between, and a second and third shot. What was the longest between the first and second, or the second and third shot was the longest time lapse in there? Between the first and the second. What did you do then? I immediately ran towards the president's car. Of course, it was speeding away, and somebody said the shots, or firecrackers, whatever it was at the time, we still didn't know the president was shot, came from the wall. I immediately scaled the wall. He's talking about the grassy knoll there. What is the location of that wall? It would be between the railroad overpass, and I can't remember the name of the little street that runs off of Elm. It's catty corner, that section there between the, what do you call it, the monument section. So see, here's another one. Now you have Frazier saying he heard shots over there, and now you've got Weitzman saying he heard shots over there. That's where Elm actually ends? Yes, sir. I scaled the wall, and apparently my hands grabbed steam pipes. I burned them. Did you go into the railroad yards? Yes, sir. What did you notice in the railroad yards? We noticed numerous kinds of footprints that did not make sense because they were going different directions. Were there other people besides you? Yes, sir, other officers, Secret Service as well. Remember, there were no Secret Service in that area at the time. I remember we read statements from other policemen saying that people were showing identification of Secret Service, and there were no Secret Service in the railroad yard or anywhere besides with the president at that time. And somebody started that there was something red in the street, and I went back over the wall, and somebody brought me a piece of what he thought to be a firecracker, and it turned out to be, I believe, I wouldn't quote this, but I turned it over to one of the Secret Service men, and I told him it should go to the lab because it looked like, to me, like human bone. So he's turning over evidence to fake Secret Service men who are collecting that evidence. Interesting. I later found it was supposedly a portion of the president's skull. Again, think about this. If the president was shot from behind, okay, a portion of the front of his skull, because the bullet would have come out the front, would have been blown into the inside of the limousine, not onto the street. Let's think about that. And again, he's turning critical evidence over to Secret Servicemen that don't exist. And I told them, yeah, let's see. I later found out it was a portion of the president's skull that you picked up off the street. Yes. What part of the street did you pick this up? As the president's car was going off, it would be the left-hand side of the street. It would be the left-hand side facing. That would be the south side of the street. So again, if someone is shooting from the grassy knoll where he's saying he heard the shooting coming from, the sound coming from, that he scaled the monument fence, that would make sense. It shot the president, the back skull of the president shot off into the street on the left hand of the street, left of the car. Anyway, it was on the south side of the street. Was it the street? It was the street itself. On the pavement? Yes, sir. Anywhere near the curb, approximately, I would say 8 to 12 inches from the curb, something like that, off the record. Boom. So then Mr. Ball panics, and they have to discuss which way to go with the questioning now that Seymour Weitzman has just basically said that the president got shot from the grassy knoll. What did you do after that? After that, we entered the building and started to search floor to floor, and we started on the first floor, second floor, third floor, and on up. Then we got to the sixth floor, fifth or sixth floor, I forget. I believe it was the sixth floor, the chief deputy or whatever, or whoever was in charge of that floor. I forget the officer's name. From the sheriff's office, said he wanted the floor torn apart. He wanted that gun, and it was there somewhere. So myself and another officer from the sheriff's department, I can't remember his name, he and I proceeded until we. Now my question is, I know that the sheriff and the other law enforcement agencies can be brought in to assist the Dallas Police Department, but that building is in the city of Dallas. So whoever is in charge of the head policeman there in Dallas would be in charge of that investigation. But here we have the sheriff taking over the investigation. Quite interesting. What was his name? Boone. That is correct. Boone and I, as he was looking over the rear section of the building, I would say the northwest corner, I was on the floor looking under the flat at the same time. He was looking on top, and we saw the gun. I would say simultaneously. And I said, "There it is." And he started hollering, "We got it." It was covered with boxes. It was well protected as far as the naked eye, because I would venture to say 8 or 9 of us stumbled over the gun a couple of times before we thoroughly searched the building. Now again, my obvious question is, how would you know to be searching for a rifle? If you don't have shooters in the building, wouldn't you assume that they took the rifle with them? But yet, they're adamant about looking to find a gun that they don't even know exists on the 6th floor. But somehow, they're aware that there must be a gun. So this is why the sheriff takes over and says, get out there and look, we're going to tear this place apart. We're looking for the gun, is what he's saying. But how would he know unless, it just seems really suspicious to me that they're looking for a gun instead of a shooter. Okay? Don't you think they would be all out in the back of the warehouse and the bottom floors looking for the shooter to come out the doors? But yet they're looking on the floors for the rifle. But they don't even know the rifle exists, or it's going to be on that floor, that the rifle might have been taken with the shooter. Doesn't it make sense that the shooter would have taken the rifle as he was exiting the building? But somehow they seem to know that there's going to be a rifle hidden somewhere on that floor. They've just got to find it. I don't know, it sounds very strange to me. It's almost like they were told ahead of time, okay, don't look for the shooter, look for the rifle. We're going to make sure that Lee's rifle is left there, so make sure you're looking for that. Alright. It's just supposition, but I just think it's strange that they're tearing the whole building apart, the whole floor apart, looking for stuff they don't even know exists. Okay? Weitzman, no sir. We made a man-tight barricade until the crime lab came up and removed the gun itself. The crime lab, oh, you just asked me if you touched it. The crime lab from the Dallas Police Department, yes sir. Lieutenant Day and Captain Fritz. I'm not sure what the lieutenant's name was, but I remember Captain Fritz. Now, just to let you know, okay, that it was Captain Fritz who confronted Wesley Frazier in the interrogation room with the already typed up confession that he was part of the assassination, and pushed it into Frazier's, for him to sign with a pen. And Frazier read the first two lines and looked up and said, "I'm not signing that." And then this same Captain Fritz, put his hand back like he was going to hit Frazier. And then Frazier put his hand up and says, "Hey, I know there's officers outside this door, but you and I are going to have a big fight, and I'm going to get a couple licks in. I might get arrested, but I'm still going to get a couple licks in." And then Fritz lowered his arm, got frustrated, took the statement and the pen, and left. You notice how Fritz came in to Frazier by himself to have him sign the confession. That was already pre-typed, by the way. It's not like Frazier wrote it out and then they retyped it and had him sign it. It was already written out. So there's something not right there with Captain Fritz, okay? Not right. Something's seriously wrong. And then you'll see Captain Fritz, there's pictures of him holding the rifle by the strap, but then he takes his hand and pops up the bolt, pulls it back, and ejects the one round that's in there. Anyway, did you see Captain Fritz remove anything from the gun? No, sir, I did not. What did you do after that? After that, I returned to my office, and I was called to the city that afternoon later to make a statement on what I had seen. I have 3 pictures here, which I have marked respectively D, E, F. I show you D first. Does that look anything like the location where you found the gun? Alright, so let's take a look at these locations here. There's D. Hold on one second. Oops, forgot to hit record. Now here I have 3 pictures. Here I've marked respectively D and E and F. Now I went over those and it doesn't show the gun very well. Does that look anything like the location where you found the gun? And again, like I want to emphasize, is that they're on the 6th floor, okay? Shouldn't they be looking on the outside of the building for any kind? Because by this time it's 1 o'clock. They should have already sealed off the building to keep anyone from leaving the building. But they're focused on finding objects that they don't even know exist, okay, in the building. And again, Captain Fritz comes up, and remember, Captain Fritz was the one that had confronted Frazier with the already pre-typed up statement as a confession to being involved in the assassination. And he put a pen down and the statement down, already pre-typed, in front of Frazier, and Frazier refused to sign. Captain Fritz threatened to hit him. Frazier put up his arm to defend himself and said, "Hey, you and I are going to get into a big tussle and fight, because I'm not going to have you intimidate me." And then Frazier says that, he and Captain Fritz could never be friends. So you got the same Captain Fritz who threatened Frazier, threatened to make him sign this false statement saying he was involved in the assassination, is now the same one that's messing with the rifle. Anyway, so Captain Fritz definitely raises my hackles. I'm going to have to do some deep diving to find out more information about him. And then let's see, was there anything between the place the gun was found? Were there any boxes between where the gun was found and the stairway? Yes, sir. There was a row of boxes between the stairway and the gun because we came up the stairway and we couldn't help but see if it was open. So apparently the implication is that Oswald fired from the window in the southeast corner, and then he, somehow wiped off all the prints on the gun, ran to the northwest corner, okay, and no one downstairs on the 5th floor heard him running across the floor, hid the rifle back in the boxes there without putting fingerprints back on it again, run down the 4th floor, or run down the 4 sets of stairs to the 2nd floor break room, past Virginia Davis, who is, on the 4th floor going down herself, and she never sees him, and then is confronted by Officer Baker in the 2nd floor lunchroom holding a Coke 90 seconds after the shooting. Impossible. Anyway. But that's their story, and they're sticking to it. Okay? Let's see. See if there's anything else interesting here. And then he says, are you familiar with rifles? Fairly familiar because I was in the sporting goods business a while. And then he switches over for some reason. I don't know why. What branch of the service were you in? This is weird. He switches back and forth. The U.S. Air Force. Did you handle rifles? Mostly Tommy guns and pistols. In the Air Force, what were you? I started off as a flying sergeant. You flew the plane? Yes, sir. How did you end up? I ended up flying them. Ended up in prison camp. Where? I was overseas in Japan. You also said at the time the rifle was found as 122. Is that correct? So from 12:30 to 122, they don't find the rifle. Okay, and no one even gets to the 6th floor and starts looking until 1 o'clock. So very strange. So for 30 minutes, there's nothing going on that 6th floor. Even though Officer Baker ran to the 2nd floor within 90 seconds of the first shot, the next 27 minutes, no one's there. Anyway, it says, I believe that is correct. I wouldn't commit myself because I am not sure. I am not positive that it was it. I'm sure because Studebaker and Day said it was 122. They also came out of the building shortly after that. Okay, and news reporters recorded the times and stuff. In his statement, it says Captain Fritz took charge of the rifle and ejected 1 live round from the chamber. Yes, sir. He did eject 1 live round. Yes, sir, he did eject 1 live round. 1 live round. Yes, sir. You said remove anything from the rifle. It was not considered that a shell. So again, that's 4 rounds. Again, that Carcano clip, like I showed you in the other videos, usually you want to put 6 rounds in there to push that down, okay? Because basically what that's going to do, if you don't put 6 rounds in there, when you push down on the clip, okay, it's going to have a 2-round gap at the top, okay? And it's going to be hard to push that down in there. Matter of fact, I think it's almost going to be impossible to load that rifle. That would be interesting to see if someone could take just 4 rounds and put in the clip and then push it down and see if that works there. Alright, so we're going to move on. Like I said, we're going to spend about 20-24 minutes on each section here. Now we're going to go back to George de Mohrenschildt. Alright, hold on one second. Anyway, it says, later life and letter to the CIA director. George and Jean de Mohrenschildt obtained a divorce in Dallas, Texas on April 3rd, 1973. So this is 14 years, okay, 10 years after the assassination, okay, and matter of fact, in this recording here, had to have been recorded just shortly before their divorce, or maybe a little bit after. After nearly 14 years of marriage, so that's 4 divorces de Mohrenschildt has. It was not reported in the local newspapers, and the couple continued to present themselves as husband and wife. So they pretended to be husband and wife even though they had gotten divorced. Don't you think that's kind of strange? And what do you think the reason for the divorce would be? Maybe, Jean started to suspect that George was completely lying about, his babysitting for Oswald, and that he knew more about the CIA connections to Oswald than he was willing to admit to her. and she couldn't stand for that. Anyway, on September 17th, 1976, the CIA requested that the FBI locate de Mohrenschildt because he had attempted to get in touch with the CIA director. On September 5th, 1976, de Mohrenschildt had written a letter to the CIA director of the CIA, George H.W. Bush. Remember the president? He was involved in the oil companies, hanging around the same Dallas oil company groups, H.L. Hunt, D.H. Byrd, all these guys, these rich oil guys. George Bush wasn't, too wealthy like H.L. Hunt, but he was up and coming. And so they made him, with absolutely no experience. I think he had been ambassador to China before that. They made him director of the CIA. Now, back then, the CIA was a good old boys network, and mostly started off with the Ivy League, Harvard, Yale, Georgetown University set, and they never hired anyone into the CIA unless they knew each other. It was a good old boys network. This is a way of ensuring they knew them, they knew their family, they grew up with them, they went to college with them. This is a way of ensuring that they weren't hiring people that could possibly be Russian agents. It was a good old boy network. They all knew each other. So you don't think that George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, wasn't part of that good old boy network? He wouldn't have been hired as a nobody, inexperienced nobody. Okay? So anyway, so it's interesting that George is writing a letter to, the George de Mohrenschildt is writing a letter to George Bush because he would have known him. He would have been associated with him because, like I said, George Bush was part of that, that Dallas oil group, most likely the ones that funded the assassination. Anyway, asking for his assistance. He was acquainted with the Bush family. George H.W. Bush had roomed with de Mohrenschildt's nephew, E. Edward G. Hooker, at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. So they're all connected. In the letter he said, "You excuse this handwritten letter. Maybe you'll be able to bring a solution to this hopeless situation I find myself in. My wife and I find ourselves surrounded by some vigilantes." Notice, it's 1976. He got divorced in 1973, but he's still calling Jean his wife. "Our phone bugged, and we're being followed everywhere. Either FBI is involved in this, or they do not want to accept my complaints. We are driven to insanity by this situation. I have been behaving like a damn fool ever since my daughter, Nadia, died from cystic fibrosis over 3 years ago. I tried to write stupidly and unsuccessfully about Lee Harvey Oswald and must have angered a lot of people. I do not know." So he's relating this 10 years later to Lee Harvey Oswald. So either he's writing favorably about Oswald and people don't like that, or he's writing things about Oswald that people think that he knows more. "But to punish an elderly man like myself and my highly nervous and sick wife is really too much." And, let's just be really clear here. He's not that elderly. He's only like 63, 64 at the time of this letter. "Could you do something to remove the net around us? This will be my last request for help, and I will not annoy you anymore. Good luck in your important job. Thank you so much." So apparently, de Mohrenschildt thinks that Bush has the power to get everyone to hush up and to leave him alone. Why would he think that? If George Bush is just the director of the CIA, he would have no power to shut up people in the FBI or the media or the conspiracy realm to do that. Anyway, George Bush responded, "Let me say first that I know that it must have been difficult for you to seek my help in the situation outlined in your letter. I believe I can appreciate your state of mind in view of your daughter's tragic death a few years ago. and the current poor state of your wife's health. I'm extremely sorry to hear of these circumstances. In your situation, I can well imagine how attentions you described in your letter affect both you and your wife. However, my staff has been unable to find any indication of interest in your activities on the part of the federal authorities in recent years. The flurry of interest that attended your testimony before the Warren Commission has long subsided. I can only speculate that you may have become newsworthy again in the view of the renewed interest in the Kennedy assassination, and thus may be attracting the attention of people in the media. I hope this letter has been of some comfort to you, George, although I realize I'm unable to answer your questions completely. And there he goes. So, apparently George Bush, even though he's head of the intelligence community, doesn't know that George Mornshill's divorced from his wife. And he's saying here that his staff is unable to find out that any federal authorities are involved in this. Again, I think it's probably the news media, because right after this, you know, after this, let's see, when was this letter? This is September 17, 1976. Now, in November, okay, that was September 5th. Yeah. So, in November, just 2 months later, okay, a whole slew of, you know, new Democrats are elected to the House of Representatives, and then Carter's elected as president. And in January, just a few months later, they start working on setting up this committee, the House Assassinations Committee, and they had been talking about it that summer before the election, about setting up a committee if they were elected. And that was one reason why some of them were elected, some of the Democrats were elected to those committees. Anyway, so that's very interesting, that the Mornshill would have to reach out to George Bush. Like I said, it's an old boy, it's a good old boys network. Everybody knows each other in the intelligence community and the oil community, okay? And so they all do little favors for each other. They get someone a letter written to her son to get into, you know, the military academy, the naval academy. They, you know, they fix a problem, you know, for each other in the FBI or the news media or whatever. And there's the same CIA circles or groups of people that in the CIA and the oil companies in the news media too. Now, not all the news media is owned by the government, the CIA. That's not what I'm saying, but there are people that, you know, went to college with, roomed with, you know, have relatives married to people in the CIA, big oil, and the news media. And this goes into the military and the FBI and other circles like that. And not all those are involved in the assassination of the president, okay? Not all of them. But they all know each other. Just like I was talking about this Georgetown clique that, you know, you've got the head of the Washington Post knew, you know, Mary Pinchino Meyer, who was having an affair with Kennedy, okay? And Kennedy lived right around the corner from Wisner, who was part of the CIA, down the street from Howard Hunt, who was part of the CIA. They all, you know, they all kind of knew each other and hung out in the same circles. Anyway, it says on November 9th, 1976, Gene had the Mornshill committed to a mental institution in Texas for 3 months and listed in a notarized affidavit 4 previous suicide attempts while he was in the Dallas area. In the affidavit, she stated that the Mornshill suffered from depression, heard voices, saw visions, and believed that the CIA and the Jewish Mafia were persecuting him. However, he was released at the end of the year. So, again, because of guilt really, you know, if you're a moral person, guilt can really, you know, do a number on you. Okay? And so, apparently, the guilt of what happened with Oswald and all these things, and how maybe he didn't know that he was setting up Oswald to take the fall as the patsy. But looking back on things at the time, looking back on things over 10 years, it started to dawn on him that, oh, that's what they did. They did this, they did that. The CIA, the big oil guys, and used me to babysit Oswald and to set him up, and that's how he got killed, and that's how it creates guilt. People don't just do things out of the blue, for no reason at all. They don't try to kill themselves and get depressed and go crazy for nothing. It doesn't just wake up one day and decide they're depressed and crazy. There are reasons that affect the mental state of someone. And if you realize that you had been used by the group that you trusted and depended on for your income to set up Oswald to kill the President of the United States, that would seriously affect your mental state. Especially if you're this live and let live, liaison faire type of person that he claims to be. According to the Dutch journalist Wilhelm Altmans, this is the guy that we're listening to right now interview de Mohrenschildt. In 1967, a serious and famous Dutch clairvoyant named Gerard Croiset had a vision of a conspirator who had manipulated Oswald. His description led Altman to de Mohrenschildt. Wow. And he stayed in touch. And the two stayed in touch. In 1977, Altman went to Texas and brought de Mohrenschildt to the Netherlands. Altman claimed that he had rescued de Mohrenschildt from a mental institution to bring him to Croiset. According to Altman, Croiset agreed to that de Mohrenschildt was the man whom he had seen in the vision. Wow, interesting. Altman says that after de Mohrenschildt arrived in the Netherlands, he invited him out with some Russian friends. They went to Brussels and had plans to go to Liege, a city in the French-speaking part of Belgium. Altmans owned a house in the countryside not far from Liege. Upon returning to Brussels, de Mohrenschildt went for a short walk. When he failed to return, he had agreed to meet Altmans and his friends for lunch. Altmans waited for him, but he did not come back. Huh. Interesting. So, this is right before he commits suicide. On March 16, 1977, de Mohrenschildt returned to the United States from his trip. His daughter talked with him at length and found him to be deeply disturbed about certain matters, that he expressed a desire to kill himself. Interesting. So why would you want to kill yourself? Okay. Again, I think it has to do with his daughter dying, and also with the fact that he realized that he'd been used to set up Oswald and to get the President of the United States killed. Anyway, let's see. His daughter talked with him at length and found him to be deeply disturbed about certain matters, reported that he had expressed a desire to kill himself. On March 29th, de Mohrenschildt gave an interview to author Edward J. Epstein, during which he claimed that a 1962 Dallas CIA operative, John Walton Moore, and one of Moore's associates had handed him the address of Lee Harvey Oswald nearby Fort Worth, and they suggested that de Mohrenschildt might like to meet him. He suggested to Moore that he would appreciate some help from the U.S. Embassy in Haiti. I would never have contacted Oswald in a million years if Moore had not sanctioned it, de Mohrenschildt said. Too much was at stake. So they steered him in the direction, okay, of babysitting Oswald for them. On the same day, as the Epstein interview, de Mohrenschildt received a business card from Gaten Fonzie, an investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassination, telling him he would like to see him. The HSCA considered him a crucial witness. That afternoon, de Mohrenschildt was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head in a house which he was staying in Manalapan, Florida. The coroner's verdict was suicide. Alright, and this is an article, it's a video from 1977. This is shortly after de Mohrenschildt killed himself, and I guess they're going to go over William Altman, this Dutch guy.
President Kennedy, from a Dutch journalist. Vic Ratner reports from Washington.
For 3 hours, Willem Oltmans was questioned closely about his uncorroborated story by the House Assassinations Committee. Although his committee testimony is secret, in public, Oltmans claimed that he'd been told of a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, allegedly involving Texas oil interests, the late millionaire H.L. Hunt, 3 anti-Castro Cuban gunmen, Lee Harvey Oswald, and George de Mohrenschildt, a friend of Oswald's who committed suicide this week when the Assassinations Committee tried to get him to testify.
Wow.
Mr. de Mohrenschildt told me in Dallas on the 23rd of February this year that Oswald acted at his instruction and that they discussed the Kennedy assassination from A to Z, and that he knew that Kennedy was going to kill Oswald was going to kill President Kennedy sooner or later.
After the session, the chairman of the Kennedy Investigation Task Force was asked if he believed Oltmans' conspiracy story.
The sort of thing he is saying, and he's named a few people, and has not been corroborated, so that I don't think there's anything he testified to that we wouldn't want to check out pretty thoroughly.
In Texas today, H.L. Hunt's family denied that the late millionaire had anything to do with the Kennedy assassination. Committee members also questioned Oltmans' unproven story, remembering that his prime source, de Mohrenschildt, once said, "Everyone else has made $1 million off the Kennedy case. Now it's my turn." Vic Ratner, ABC News, Washington.
What he knows about the assassination of President Kennedy, he not only told me, but he gave me a copy of the letter he wrote about this, registered to Senator Frank Church when he ran the CIA investigation, saying, "I know who ordered the assassination of John F. Kennedy."
Was any attempt made by any of the people you contacted to follow up on the information?
Well, the amazing thing is that after I gave a copy of the complete letter to both the Select Committee on Assassinations and the President's lawyer for assassinations at the Justice Department, Mr. Robert Keach, they have had it for 6 months. They claim they are unable to find General Donaldson, and they haven't done a damn thing about it.
So it's interesting that he said that Altman is saying that de Mohrenschildt said that Oswald's involved in the assassination, when you're going to hear de Mohrenschildt say that Oswald was definitely not involved in the assassination. He couldn't hurt a fly. He loved Kennedy. He admired Kennedy. All these kinds of things. And again, it goes back to my supposition that if he shot General Oswald, if he shot at General Edwin Walker, who's a right-wing fascist, okay, and that he was, thrown out of the military by Kennedy and thrown into a mental institution by Kennedy, or Robert Kennedy, why would he shoot JFK if he admired JFK and hated, fascists like Walker? Doesn't make any sense. But anyway, so let me see here. There's another article here. Professor 65 who killed himself may have been Oswald confidant. And it says a Russian-born professor committed suicide. This is right after his suicide. Apparently, when he learned the House Investigating Committee wanted his testimony concerning President Kennedy's assassination, may once have been an operative for the Central Intelligence Agency and confidant of Lee Harvey Oswald. Sources familiar with his case said today. 65 years old, was found yesterday in a second-floor study of the Palm Beach waterfront mansion of his daughter Alexandra, 33, who had just returned from a shopping trip. His death came shortly after he learned that an investigator for the House Assassination Committee was seeking him to testify before the committee with his connections from Oslo. Now, the question I have is, if you know that your father is suicidal and de Mohrenschildt blew his brains out with a shotgun, why would you leave him alone in the house with a shotgun in the house? That doesn't make any sense, right? Anyway, let's see. The timing of de Mohrenschildt's death immediately became a factor in the House Committee's request to extend its investigation of the political assassinations. Representative Richardson Breyer, Democrat of North Carolina, said the committee had linked Mr. de Mohrenschildt to new evidence that indicated de Mohrenschildt had been closer to Lee Harvey Oswald than appeared on the surface. The source who investigated the Kennedy assassination for 3 years asserted that Mr. de Mohrenschildt, who had degrees in international commerce, petroleum geology, and engineering, was serving as a CIA agent in Haiti in 1963, the year that President Kennedy was killed in Dallas. Mr. de Mohrenschildt denied in public testimony before the Federal Commission that investigated Kennedy's death that he had ever been an agent of the government. He said in a wide travels over several countries, solely business connected. However, commission head by the Chief Justice Warren Commission, Earl Warren, also noted off the record testimony from him that has never been made public. De Mohrenschildt talked last month in Dallas with a Dutch journalist, Wilhelm Oltmans, who told the House Assassination Committee that the professor had made a shocking confession that he knew in advance that Oswald was going to do, what Oswald was going to do, according to the Warren Commission report published in October 1964. Mr. de Mohrenschildt and his wife met Oswald and his wife Marina in Dallas in 1962. Mr. Pryor said that Mr. de Mohrenschildt was a crucial witness for us based on the new information he had. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office withheld any official ruling on Mr. de Mohrenschildt's death until the results of the autopsy and further investigation were made public. But Lieutenant Richard Sheets said there was no reason to suspect anything other than suicide. Mr. de Mohrenschildt, who was a French language teacher at Bishop College in Dallas at the time of his death, arrived from Brussels a week ago with his daughter to visit Mrs. Charles Tilton III. Deaths called unusual. And it's also saying that Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli were found killed also after they had been called to testify with the committee there. Alright, so we're going to go back into that video. Hold on a second. Alright, again, this is the video, the recordings, recorded by William Oltmans, the Dutch journalist we were just talking about. I don't know the year that this was recorded, but obviously it's before all this. I don't know. I don't think this was recorded in Belgium, but anyway, here we go.
Yes, but George, you did write, let's face it, you did write the possible reason he killed Kennedy was insanely. Why don't you read that?
Yeah, well, because it's different.
What is different?
Okay, I'll answer.
Because this way...
The innocent children, they will not affect the innocent children somehow.
Just, I'm sorry to have to come to business here.
Yeah.
Why don't you do it chronologically? You made the notes of what you said. Why don't you come up with it? Why do you skip it now?
All right. Well,
it's boring you.
It's boring and it's very long, and this is the pages,
so what?
The pages are long. This is an example of a thing that I really dislike about my testimony.
So that's why I want to come to it.
All right. Well, and I think that I was really bamboozled into saying it because of the general atmosphere. And I did say that the possible reason Lee killed Kennedy, that he was insanely jealous of an extraordinarily successful man who was young, attractive, had a beautiful wife, had all the money in the world, and he was a world figure. And poor Lee Oswald was just the opposite.
This appeared in the Warren Committee report.
What?
This was quoted.
So again, that doesn't make any sense if Lee is this, anti-capitalist, communist, Marxist revolutionary. He would care less about money. He would care less about wealth and things like that. But also Lee was, financially frugal. Hardly spent any money at all. His wife is constantly complaining. You're going to hear him talk about that. And, was able to pay off his State Department loan, and his brother the State Department gave him, $500, and his brother loaned him $100. And if you think about that, okay, if you're making $1.25 and you've got $600 to pay off, if you're making $1.25 and you've got $600 to pay off, it's going to take you 480 hours to pay that off, okay? So if you didn't eat or pay the electricity or pay for food or pay the rent, you could pay it off in 10 weeks, 2.5 months, okay? And Oswald miraculously was able to pay off this loan within 6 months. So very, very interesting. We'll go over his finances another time, but
yeah. He had nothing. He had a bitchy wife. He had no money. Was a failure in everything he did.
And you look upon this now as a little unfair, maybe.
I said I look at it now as an unfair statement.
Yeah.
Towards Lee Harvey Oswald.
Towards Lee Harvey Oswald. And I continued my testimony. It's in the report.
Because Lee Harvey Oswald didn't care about financial gain and wealth like these people did in Russia, or these people did in Dallas, and Des Moines Show did.
It made him a hero in his own mind, possibly. He did not realize that he was doing it at the expense of the whole nation. It might have been a mental blackout. That's what was my conclusion.
And you regret that now?
I certainly do.
George, is this all you want to say about what you said in the Warren report?
Oh, the Warren report is there for people to read. And yeah, for instance, there are other interesting questions that they ask me.
Yeah.
Jenner asked me, as a humanitarian person, you cannot imagine anybody murdering anybody else. I said, I cannot imagine. I certainly cannot imagine. I still expressed doubts regarding Oswald's guilt.
Yeah.
I kept on doing it. Again, I want to come back to the letters I wrote to Jacqueline Kennedy's mother. And I didn't want to have them publicized, but they were presented by Mrs. Auchincloss to the Warren Committee, and they are now integral part of the Warren Committee report.
Oh, she gave them?
She gave the letters to the Warren Committee. Yeah. And she also gave a copy of the letter she wrote to me. And this is a rather interesting letter, which expresses many things. It seems extraordinary, she writes, to me that you knew Oswald and that you knew Jackie as a child. It is certainly a very strange world.
So I was just thinking of a timeline real quick. So think of it like this, okay? De Mohrenschildt was trying to protect himself because when Kennedy gets killed, Oswald gets arrested, and then he's killed. He realizes that, oh my God, maybe people are going to think I had something to do with it. Maybe people are going to think I, steered Oswald in that direction. So he threw Oswald under the bus and said, yeah, maybe he was just jealous of Kennedy with his wealth and his beautiful wife and his money and his fame and his good looks and things like that. So that's initially what he did. But then later over time, he starts to realize that he had thrown Oswald under the bus. And this is where you get to this interview here. And then after this interview, he becomes depressed, divorces his daughter dies. That makes him even more depressed. He and his wife divorce, but they stay together. And I can imagine the arguments, in the bedroom at night. It's like, George, did you know anyone in the CIA that was, trying to implicate or frame Oswald? Maybe they used you. Think about that. Maybe you got used by the CIA. Maybe they used us to babysit Oswald and to help set him up. You ever thought about that, George? So these conversations of pillow talk going on at night. I think that's what drove him into depression and eventually into suicide. Because now he's going to have to, he's already talked about the Warren Commission about it, didn't have a problem throwing Oswald on the bus. Gene says it was a waste of time, and with the expense and everything they did, And then he gets the notification to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and then he realizes he just can't handle it. He can't go there anymore for what he did, and how he was used by these rogue elements of the CIA and these people that he depended on for his money, you know, the Dallas oil men, all these people. And, you know, sometimes things build up in someone's mind and it becomes too much. Just like this guy Twitch just killed himself. What was going on in Twitch's mind that would make him, you know, Twitch boss, kill himself? It looked like he had it all. Happiness, a family, a career. Who knows? Who knows what those things are going on in people's heads that make them do what they do. Anyway.
Your letter made me think a good deal. I hope too that Mrs. Oswald will not suffer. This was the letter from January 29, 64.
From Mrs. Auchincloss to
January
you.
Auchincloss. And
we keep it because you have to.
Yeah.
Don't throw it out. Keep it here.
No, I want to conclude.
George, please be relaxed and take your time. I don't care how much time you take, but don't hurry and don't think any statement of yours is too long or too boring. We need the complete information in order to make your book worthwhile. So take your time, and we will be here. And as Stevenson said in the United Nations, till hell freezes over until it is done, George. Okay?
Very tired by our testimonies, we were invited the evening after deposition to Georgetown and spend the evening with Mr. and Mrs. Hugh Auchincloss, Jacqueline's mother and stepfather.
The Georgetown set again.
Where we also discovered that everybody's mind was made up that Lee was the assassin. We tried to object, but of no avail. Both my wife and Janet Auchincloss finally cried together, one over the death of her son-in-law, another over the loss of a president whom she loved and admired.
Jean, you want to come in here about your conversation? One moment, George. Let Jean recall it in her own words.
But the one thing struck me. She was actually a mother. Mrs. Auchincloss was mother-in-law of Jack Kennedy. And I was complete outsider and complete stranger. She didn't want any investigation. She didn't want to know who killed Jack, why and what for. All she kept on telling me that Jack is dead and nothing will return him back. I had entirely different opinion. Just because he was such a great man, and just because he was my beloved president, I would turn every stone on earth to find out who did it. And I want to make sure that that person, it's even too much to call it person, should be punished. Because things like that have no right to go on this earth be unpunished.
Thank you. And actually you got into a fight.
So, what she's talking about is the Georgetown set, okay? So this is that group of people, you know, that they all attended Harvard or Yale or one of these Ivy League schools, maybe even Georgetown University, and they live just north of Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and this is the power set here. Kennedy lived in several houses in that area. The Kennedy family had an estate there. We can go down the list here. Let's see, Frank Wisner, he was part of the CIA's, what do you want to call it, aggressive operations. So he's the one that went after very aggressive operations against the Soviet Union, and it's my understanding that he ended up going crazy because he didn't know that Kim Philby was, you know, this British MI6 guy was a traitor and was turning in all his operations over to the Russians, and they were catching all these operations. So Frank Wisner was head of all these special operations, clandestine operations going out there against the Soviet Union, and they were all getting compromised. And it wasn't till later that Kim Philby was actually out of the MI6 and was actually caught, and he escaped to the Soviet Union. But that was Frank Reisner, was just literally down the street from where Kennedy lived before he became president. Philip Graham, who's the husband of Katharine Graham. Philip Graham owned the Washington Post. You know, the Washington Post was the one that went after Kennedy with, you know, Bob Woodward, you know, and Deep Throat, and the Watergate is, you know, the Watergate thing. The Watergate is just right down south of the Georgetown area. Dave Bruce, I'm not familiar with. Nurse Stuart Alslip or Walt Rostow. I'm sure all these people are all CIA connected. There's Dean Acheson, who was in the State Department. Richard Bissell, I believe, was in the State Department or even the CIA. Let's see. Tracy Barnes was in the CIA. Cord Meyer was in the CIA. Cord Meyer was married to Mary Pinoche Meyer, who supposedly had a sexual relationship with JFK and was found before the, you know, was found murdered along the Potomac River waterbank right before the Warren Commission testimony came out. Okay, and she was keeping a diary about stuff that she was hearing, and then it's really interesting that her sister called the head guy for the Washington Post under Katharine Graham, called him, called this guy in the Washington Post his wife and said, hey, my sister has a diary she's been keeping of her, you know, affairs with Kennedy and all these other things going on. She keeps it in her art studio, and the art studio is owned by another person, and would you mind going over there and getting this diary of hers, because we don't want it to be released to the media and embarrass people and stuff like that. So he went over there, the head of the editor for the Washington Post, went over there and with his wife, and as they were entering the studio, Jesus James Angleton, the head of counterintelligence, they saw him breaking into the apartment and took the diary. Okay, so they all knew each other. They all knew, and this was like 1963. Later on, he would become editor of the Washington Post there. Then there was James Angleton. Jesus James Angleton was living in that area. Harriman was in that area. McCloy, Felix Frankfurter, Alan Dulles lived in that area. You know, yeah. So they all were living in that area, and they had a ladies' social club, which included Katharine Graham, Mary Pinoche Meyer, you know, all these people, Polly Weisner, all the wives of all these CIA guys. Also, just a little known thing here is that there's a picture of Kennedy leaving his Georgetown flat. He was an officer working, I believe, in counterintelligence or something in the Navy, and was seen leaving his flat, and he'd actually gotten caught by the FBI having an affair with this woman. This is before he got married. Having a sexual relationship with this woman who was found out later to be a German spy. Okay, and so then instead of getting in trouble, because, you know, they all know each other, he was sent to the Pacific to get him away from this woman. Anyway, but this is all the names there, and it's just incredible how many of these people, they all knew each other, okay? And they're all involved in the CIA, and they're all, you know, involved in all these different things. Cord Meyer was part of that group, and it's just amazing. And then they had, you know, people that were, like I said, this is the Georgetown, Washington, D.C. area, so you're going to have CIA circles intermingling with military circles, intermingling with, you know, news media circles, and intermingling with other type of political circles there also. But it's just fascinating. I should do a whole thing on this. But that's what she's talking about. They're at one of these dinner parties, you know, and Katharine Graham and all the Kennedys are there. They're at the Kennedys' estate there, and I have to give you some. I've got all these addresses of all these places. We'll have to. It'd be interesting to, you know, go and look at the addresses and just show you how close everybody was. Anyway, so we'll go back to this recording here.
It was we had a disagreement or argument, and I couldn't possibly understand how the person, a woman, being so close to the man that was so killed so horribly, having no interest whatsoever to continue investigation and finding a person who did it. And here's a complete outsider, but just happens to know how great that man was, wanted the justice to be brought and showed to everybody who actually did it.
Thank you, John. Judge, may I once more say, take your time. Don't throw any material out, because we have the time.
At the end of our conversation at Mr. and Mrs. Hugh Auchinclaw's house, to my surprise, Mrs. Auchinclaw told me, "My daughter Jacqueline does not want to see you ever again because you had befriended her husband's assassin."
Wow.
So you see how their mind was made up. "That's her privilege," I replied, and we left the magnificent house with its millions of dollars of art treasures and thought of Harvey Lee Oswald's poor and tragic life.
See how he calls him Harvey Lee
Fortunately,
Oswald?
the Haitian government was reassured by the Warren Committee, and we did not have much trouble anymore. But we did have a lot of trouble later because of the wrong interpretation by the press of my friendship with Lee Harvey Oswald. We cannot even give here a resume of incongruous theories that have evolved in feverish brains of some writers as a result of this Warren Committee report. One of them being that I had operated Harvey Lee Oswald by long distance wave transmission, having previously inserted an infinitesimal receiver in his skull.
In his car?
Skull.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, you realize that even last week, the second week of February...
Again, this is all bullshit because, you know, people can speculate about, you know, hypnotizing Oswald and controlling Oswald, and Oswald was part of the, you know, part of the conspiracy and all this kind of bullshit. But the facts are that, like I've been saying before, you know, regardless of all the BS and all the crap that's thrown up in the air, the facts are that Lee Harvey Oswald's fingerprints were not found on the gun. I've gone over that you cannot fire that gun. I showed you numerous examples. You can't fire that gun without leaving fingerprints on the stock, on the trigger. It's just impossible. Fingerprints, thumbprints on the casings, on the bullets. It's just impossible. On the clip. And then, of course, the paraffin tests show that Oswald didn't fire a rifle. He may have fired a handgun, but he didn't fire that rifle. So regardless of all this speculation, bullshit, mind control crap, it doesn't matter. Don't be confused. Okay? The facts are is that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't fire that weapon and kill Kennedy. Besides, we're going to go over testimony that he was in the second floor lunchroom. You know? And that's where people that saw him before the assassination occurred, 15, 20 minutes before, and up to 5 minutes before, and then within 90 seconds after the assassination. So there's no way that Oswald could have been in that second floor lunchroom, ran upstairs 5 minutes. He didn't even know when Kennedy was coming by, okay, because Kennedy was running 15 minutes late, okay? So Kennedy, if he figured Kennedy was going to be in that area, he's got to be psychic, okay, to know that Kennedy is going to be by his window at exactly 12:30, because Kennedy was supposed to be at the Trade Mart at 12:30. Okay? So it doesn't make any sense. So regardless of all this other bullshit, it doesn't matter. Anyway, we're going to stop there, and we'll pick this up tomorrow. We'll keep just going down this same line here. We're going to do timeline testimony, some more background about DeMornshield and his associates, and then we're going to listen to DeMornshield, because I just think this is critical, besides just reading testimony, to listen to DeMornshield and his insight on Oswald. Okay? And then, this insight is what drove him into depression and suicide, because he realized he'd been used. He realized that he was part of a plan that he didn't know about. Like I said, think about you and your business, or you and the corporation or company you're working at right now. You don't know what's going on in the next room, in the accounting department, in the quality assurance department, in other departments on your floor, much less on another floor. Okay, much less, you don't know what the guy in the next cubicle is working on. Okay? And that your manager and his manager and the top guys above you can be running the whole show and moving pieces around like on a chessboard, and you're just a pawn, not even realizing that you're being handled, manipulated, and used like DeMornshield was used, okay, to accomplish a certain goal that you're not even aware of. Okay? You see how DeMornshield was, encouraged to go contact Oswald, because this might be someone you might be interested in. Okay? Again, you got this rich guy, geologist, professor, who's hanging out with the richest people in Dallas and in the country. Okay? But yet he's going to go spend a large portion of his time with this poor, confused, crazy Marxist-Leninist revolutionary that hasn't a penny to his name, supposedly. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, how often do you see people like Elon Musk and, the guy who owns the Virgin Atlantic, and the guy who owns Amazon? How often are you going to be seeing them hanging out with some street cleaner or janitor? Okay? Some guy who's driving a taxi cab and helping him with his marriage, and going to visit him and chatting with him and having dinner with him and giving him, helping him. How often is that going to happen? Not very often. Okay? People tend to, back then, and just like back then and just like now, all hang out with people of their same social class. Okay? These same rich people hang out at the same country clubs, the Georgetown set, they go to the same dinner parties. George DeMornshield is not going to be, Elon Musk is not going to be inviting, some communist, socialist, revolutionary, confused, crazy man to his dinner party, or on a flight to Abu Dhabi to watch the World Soccer games with him. It's not going to happen. He's going to be hanging out with Jared Kushner and all these other rich people. That's the way those things work. But here you have this guy, DeMornshield, hanging out in these circles in the Georgetown set, hanging out with the rich people at the Adolphus Hotel and the H.L. Hunt, billionaire, richest man on the planet at the time. But he's willing to sacrifice his time, okay, and go help out this loser, this confused, disaffected traitor. Okay? Again, don't forget that, DeMornshield is also part of that Tsarist set, the White Russian set, okay, whose families still have relatives back in Soviet Russia in gulags and been murdered by the communists. but he's going to hang out with this guy who's supposedly a communist? Come on. How stupid do you think we are? And of course, proof is in the pudding. When de Mohrenschildt realizes what he did, and probably those late night conversations with Jean in the bed, how could you have done that to Oswald? He was such a good man, and his wife, and then you set him up. You work with these people that set him up, and he got killed because of you. You were part of that. You don't think that contributed to him and his wife getting a divorce, and him getting into depression and suicidal, and then eventually killing himself? It all comes around. Karma will get you and kick your ass when you least expect it. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay? If you hang out in the mud with pigs, you're gonna get fucking dirty. And in de Mohrenschildt's case, he realized he couldn't wash the pig shit off. And so that's what people do when they can't cleanse their mind. They shut down their mind by killing themselves. That is exactly what suicide is. It's an inability to live within your own mind. Okay? That, regardless of all the medical, psychological studies about it, that's exactly what suicide is an inability or an unwillingness to live within the thoughts of your own minds, the boundaries of your own mind, because of what you either done or participated in or a part of. It wears on you, and that's what it did. It did it to Twitch. It did it to every person probably who's committed suicide. You know, and it also did it to George de Mohrenschildt, a millionaire at 65, and he kills himself. How does that make any sense? Anyway, I've gone way, way over. All right, take care. Bye-bye.